The morning in Portland was colder than I had expected. My breath turned into thin wisps of vapor as I stepped away from the concrete pour, the sound of drills and steel clashing echoing across the construction site. I was reviewing the structural design for the fourth floor when my phone buzzed, the screen flashing the words, "Emily, video call." My daughter rarely called during work hours unless something urgent had happened. I pushed my gloves aside, brushed the cement dust from my reflective jacket, and answered. The image that appeared on the screen was not just Emily, but Linda, my ex-wife, sitting close beside her, both of them smiling brightly as if they had just won the lottery. "Dad, we have wonderful news." Emily's voice was high with excitement, her eyes sparkling, her cheeks flushed. Linda nodded enthusiastically, her tone dripping with sweetness. Before I could ask, Emily rushed on as if afraid I might interrupt. "Dad, you know what? We have solved the financial part of the wedding already. Everything is taken care of." I frowned. "Financial part?" Linda leaned closer to the screen, her smile widening. "Ken, Emily and I sold the house in Tacoma. Got a great price. The money will cover the entire wedding and still leave enough for a honeymoon in the Maldives." Her words fell like cold metal hitting the floor. I could still hear the cement mixer churning outside, but inside my head, everything suddenly thickened and slowed. Emily beamed, raising her hand as if checking off a list of items already booked. Beach resort, 350 guests, flowers imported from the Netherlands, live band. Mom and I booked it all. "It will be a beautiful $90,000 wedding, Dad." I froze. "That house is in my name," I said slowly, each word landing heavy like a hammer on a nail. "How did you sell it?" Linda shrugged lightly, her voice airy as though this was no more than borrowing an old piece of furniture. "Family helps each other. Paperwork is just a small thing." I understood then that her version of helping never meant mutual agreement, only imposition. And paperwork is just a small thing had only one meaning. They had forged my signature. Emily seemed completely unaware the air had shifted. "You are hardly ever there. I thought you would be happy to know the house is being used for an important family occasion." The house, the one I had repaired with my own hands, replaced every door frame, every floorboard, built up with decades of a structural engineer's wages, now sold off like a worn decoration in exchange for a single lavish party. I did not answer right away. My eyes went to the corner of the temporary site office, where the house keys still hung on a wooden hook. The keys were old, their handles worn smooth by years of use. The one thing I always carried with me, no matter how far the job took me. I walked over, took them in my hand. The metal was icy against my skin, cold like the feeling crawling into my chest. Emily kept talking about the premium seafood menu, the one-of-a-kind wedding dress, how Alex, her fiancé, would be so proud showing guests around the venue. Linda sat beside her, nodding as if they had done something entirely right. I tightened my grip on the keys until I could hear the faint scrape of metal on metal. In that moment, I knew everything had changed, not because of the money, not because of the house, but because the truth had just made itself plain. To them, I was neither a father nor someone who had once shared a home. I was only a means to get what they wanted. "I will call back later," I said, cutting into the conversation about imported orchids. My voice was even and low, revealing nothing. Linda smiled, thinking I was simply busy. "All right, but Ken, truly you will be happy." I ended the call. The black screen reflected my own face, calm but with eyes that were no longer the same. I slipped the keys into my pocket, stepped out of the office, and let the noise of the construction site swallow my silence. I would really like to know where you are watching from. Leave a comment below, hit the like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about overcoming betrayal. 8 years ago, when my marriage ended, the two-story wooden house in Tacoma was the only thing I kept besides a few boxes of clothes and books. Most people think that keeping the house after a divorce is luck. To me, it was more than luck. It was proof that I could stand on my own even after losing everything else. On the day the court signed the divorce decree, I came home on a gray afternoon. The living room was hollow, holding only the worn sofa set and the coffee table with the cigarette burn Linda had left years before. I stood on the porch steps with the keys in my hand. They were cold, but at that moment they felt like the only thing still loyal to me. I promised myself I would never lose them, in the literal sense or the figurative one. The house needed far more than a fresh coat of paint. The wooden floors groaned, the roof leaked when it rained, and the electrical system was decades out of date. I did not hire anyone. I had no money for that. Instead, I used my own hands and the patience of a structural engineer. Every plank was relayed, every brick replaced, every outlet rewired for safety. Some nights I worked until dawn, falling asleep on the freshly polished floor while the smell of varnish still hung in the air. Emily was 19 then, still living with Linda. I did not blame her. She needed stability. But whenever she visited, she would frown at the sight of her father covered in wood dust, wearing old work clothes. She once asked, "Dad, why work so hard? Why not hire someone?" I just smiled and handed her a hammer. Some things, if you do them yourself, you will value more. But I knew she did not understand. Even though I lived alone, I made sure Emily lacked nothing. I paid her tuition for 4 years at a communications program in Seattle. When she overspent on her credit card, I quietly paid it off so she would not end up with bad credit. When she graduated, I covered the rent on her first apartment in the city, thinking it would give her a solid start. Linda, though she was my ex-wife, still received monthly support from me. Not because of legal obligation, we had no alimony agreement, but because I wanted to keep peace so Emily would not be caught between her parents. Linda called it family spirit, but I knew it was her way of maintaining the standard of living she had been used to when she was with me. The first few years, things seemed fine. Emily found work at an event planning company, had friends, had her own life. Then Alex appeared, the only son of a wealthy local family, driving a silver sports car, wearing only tailored suits. Just months into dating him, Emily began to change. Everyday clothes were replaced with designer dresses. Morning Starbucks runs gave way to brunches at high-end restaurants. I remember the first time I saw her step out of Alex's car, a Chanel bag on her arm, smiling brightly but with a new distance in her eyes. One evening, she called me in a cheerful voice. "Dad, this weekend, Alex and I are going to Napa Valley, wine tasting at the big vineyards." I stayed silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Have you paid off your credit card yet?" On the other end came a long sigh. "You always talk about money. Why can't you just be happy for me? I have never been the kind of father who says sweet things easily. My life has always been steel, concrete, numbers, things straightforward and exact." I warned her about overspending. No one knows the future. Do not put yourself in a position where you depend on someone else. But each time, she would change the subject or say flatly, "You are so cheap. You always think about money first." Linda was no help. In fact, she defended her. A young woman should enjoy her youth. A man will be proud to see his wife beautiful and stylish. I disagreed but did not argue. Every time I saw the old keys hanging on the hook by the porch, I reminded myself that they were the one thing I had to protect, and those arguments would go nowhere. When Emily and Alex got engaged, I genuinely hoped it was a step toward her maturity. I was ready to contribute part of the wedding costs, as long as it was reasonable. But only weeks later, the list of demands grew long. A beachfront resort venue, a 5-course menu for 350 guests, imported white orchids, a live band. I asked the total cost. Emily said nearly $90,000, as if it were nothing unusual. I told her I will help with part of it, but you two need to cover most of it. It is your wedding. Her answer sent a cold shiver down my back. "You worry too much. Mom says your house is worth a lot. If you sell it, everything will be taken care of." I laughed, thinking it was just a harmless joke. At the time, I did not know she and Linda were already making real plans. And I did not know that only months later, the keys I had held tight for 8 years would become the center of a blatant betrayal. I left the construction site in Portland earlier than usual that day, not because I was tired or the work was finished, but because I needed a quiet space to think. Back at my rental room, I closed the door, drew the curtains, and set the house keys on the table. The chill of the metal still lingered in my palm. I dialed Thomas Reed. Thomas and I had known each other since college, when we both studied while working in the school's machine shop. He chose law, I chose engineering, but for 30 years we had kept in touch. Thomas was the kind of person who, when you were in trouble, didn't need a long explanation. He would understand immediately. He picked up after the third ring. "Ken, what happened? You sound not all right." I told the story plainly, leaving nothing out. The video call, Linda and Emily selling the house, Linda's remark that paperwork is just a small thing, Emily's smug smile. Thomas stayed silent while I spoke, the only sound a pen tapping lightly on his desk. "Tell me about the legal status of the house," he said when I finished. I opened a drawer, took out the key to my safe. Inside, beneath a few envelopes of tax documents and insurance papers, was a black folder with bold letters, Mitchell Property LLC. I set it on the table, my fingers brushing over the smooth cover. "The house has been owned by this company for 3 years. I am the sole director and 100% owner." Thomas gave a short laugh, his tone carrying a trace of relief. "You really are careful. Legally, Linda and Emily cannot sell it. If they went through with the deal, it is completely illegal." "I had thought about this for a long time," I told him. "Not because I suspected anyone in particular, but because I knew life had plenty of moments where you could be put at a disadvantage. Transferring the property to a company was the best way to keep it out of anyone else's reach." Thomas cleared his throat. "All right, here's what we will do. I will immediately request a freeze on any transactions related to Mitchell Property LLC. At the same time, I need you to gather as much evidence as possible. Broker emails, copies of forged documents, anything tied to them faking your signature." I nodded, knowing he could not see it. "I can request copies of the transaction file from the brokerage office. I can also check my email to see if there are confirmations they blocked me from receiving." Thomas went on. "We also need to prove motive. The fact that they used the money for a luxury wedding will be important. Do you still have the cost breakdown?" "I do. Emily emailed me the item list and cost estimates a few weeks ago. I will forward it to you." When we ended the call, I opened the LLC folder. Inside were the articles of organization, the certificate of formation, and the deed transferring the house from my personal name to the company's name. Every page carried my signature, a notary stamp, and the property office's file number. The signature was clear and deliberate, nothing like the forgery Linda or Emily must have used. I did not just want to keep the house. I wanted them to see that what they thought was the perfect plan was nothing but an amateur's trick in the eyes of the law. I spent the entire evening reviewing every document. In the property folder on my hard drive, I found the home insurance policy, renovation blueprints, and repair invoices. I knew Thomas would need all of it to prove the property's value and my legal ownership. Then I opened another folder, the one I had simply labeled support payments. Inside was an Excel spreadsheet listing every contribution I had made to Linda and Emily over 8 years. Tuition, credit card debt payments, rent, car insurance, even the times Emily said she had accidentally booked first-class flights. The total far exceeded what I had ever imagined, and not once had they said thank you. I looked at the final number, then at the keys lying next to it. Suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I would cut everything immediately. No warnings, no arguments, just absolute silence and a clean break. I logged into my bank account and canceled every recurring transfer. The $1,200 monthly payment to Linda, the $450 rent payment for Emily, the credit card bills I had been quietly covering. When I finished, the screen displayed no recurring transactions. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. My phone buzzed, a message from Emily. "Dad, this weekend I want to bring Alex to the house to pick a spot for wedding photos. Will you be there?" I did not reply. Instead, I took a photo of the keys in the LLC folder, sent it to Thomas with the caption, "This is what they never saw coming." That night, I sat alone at the table, the yellow lamplight washing over the folder's cover. I knew the coming fight would not be loud like the clash of steel at the job site. It would play out in silence on paper with seals and legal signatures. And I would be the one directing it. They thought I only knew how to bow my head and accept. They did not know I had spent my entire life planning every detail to ensure any structure I built would have an unshakable foundation. And this time, that structure was me. The freeze order was signed on Monday morning. Thomas called me while I was standing on the third-floor balcony of a new build, looking down at the line of trucks hauling materials through the gate. His voice was firm, almost unable to hide his satisfaction. It is done. The bank and the brokerage have both received the notice. Any transaction tied to the house or the funds from the sale will be locked until the court reviews the case. I nodded, phone still to my ear, my eyes fixed on the silver-gray horizon. Do they know yet? Not yet. But the moment one of them tries to withdraw or move the money, the system will flag the account as temporarily locked, and they will understand immediately. I said nothing more. We ended the call, and I went back to work as if nothing had happened. By afternoon, my phone began to buzz nonstop. First it was Emily. I ignored it. Then Linda. I ignored it again. Each time the ringing stopped, within 10 seconds the screen lit up again. I set the phone face down on the desk in the temporary site office. The light still seeped through the gap between rolled-out blueprints. I reached up and unhooked the keys hanging on the wooden peg. The cold metal sat in my palm. About an hour later, the call stopped. I guess they had given up for now, until the messages poured in. From Emily. Dad, I do not know what happened, but the money from the bank did not go into the account as expected. Dad, what did you do? Mom says call you right away. Dad, you have to explain. This is my wedding money. From Linda. Ken, you need to call me. The bank says there is a legal issue with the house sale. This is just a misunderstanding. We can sort it out privately. I did not respond. That evening, while I was having a simple dinner, sandwich and black coffee, the phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. I recognized the voice immediately as the leader of the live band Emily had bragged about booking. Sorry, I am looking for Ken Mitchell. I am having trouble getting in touch with Emily Gill and Linda. Our deposit was rejected by the bank. They said there is a problem with the source of the funds. Do you know what is going on? I am not involved in booking wedding services, I said evenly. You should speak directly with the person who signed the contract, he muttered under his breath, then gave a curt thanks before hanging up. I knew this was only the beginning. Sure enough, half an hour later, a florist called with the same question. Then the restaurant booked for the reception menu. In the next 2 hours, I took more than 6 calls from different vendors, all saying their deposits had not cleared. Clearly, Emily and Linda were in disarray, but they were still trying to keep it contained. They had not let anyone outside know the truth, probably hoping the issue would disappear if they could find a way to fix it. I pictured them in Linda's living room, phones on the table, each dialing number after number, scrambling for solutions. Linda probably trying to sound calm, offering sweet explanations to vendors, while Emily paced the floor, gripping her phone, her voice cracking with worry. Meanwhile, I sat still in my chair, turning the keys over in my hand. The metal clinked softly against itself, like the ticking of a clock, each second counting down to the moment they would realize they were facing a wall they could not get past. Night fell, and my phone lit up again. Not short calls now, but long, repeated rings, as if they thought the constant sound might wear me down. But the ringing went on, and I still did not answer. At one point, I unlocked the screen just to see the call log. It was so long I had to scroll twice. Every single one was from Emily or Linda. I set the phone back on the desk, the keys still in my palm, pressing faint marks into my skin. The feeling was cold, but steady. I knew I was beginning to take back control, not just of the house, but of how they had treated me for years. And I also knew this was only the beginning. 4 days after the freeze order took effect, I was sitting in a cafe near the construction site when my phone lit up with a message from Thomas. You should see this. He had included a link to a Facebook post from Shoreline Florals, the flower shop Emily had once bragged was the top importer of floral arrangements in the state. The bold text at the top of the post made me slow down to read. We regret to inform you that Shoreline Florals has ceased providing services for the wedding of Emily Gill and her family due to non-payment. After multiple attempts to reach them, we learned the initial deposit had a legal issue and was frozen by the bank. This is something we have never encountered in 20 years of operation. We advise other vendors to exercise caution when working with this family. In the comment section, a list of other companies was tagged. The band, a bakery, the event planning firm. Some had replied, confirming they were experiencing the same situation. I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. The post had been shared more than 200 times in just a few hours. Just as Thomas had said, bad news spreads faster than anything else. By midday, the Tacoma Times ran a short piece in its community news section. Multiple wedding vendors in Pierce County alleged they were stiffed by the bride's family after a proper transaction tied to them was frozen on suspicion of fraud. The case is now under official investigation. The article didn't name names, but anyone in Tacoma knew who Emily Gill was. She had been parading her wedding plans online for months. That afternoon, a 15-second video began circulating online. It showed a band rehearsing in a studio with the caption, "We won't be playing at that $90,000 wedding after all. Deposit." Never saw it. The clip quickly passed 10,000 views. Around 5 p.m., my phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring out, but less than a minute later, it lit up again. I answered just to see what she would say. Her voice was trembling, though she still tried to keep it soft. "Ken, you have to help me. Everything is falling apart. We put down too many deposits, and if we don't pay the rest, they'll keep the money, maybe even sue. You know this will ruin Emily." I stayed silent, letting her hear the steady rhythm of my breathing through the line. Linda pressed on. "You don't have to cover it all, just the urgent ones. After the wedding, we can talk again." I looked at the keys sitting on the table next to my coffee cup, the metal catching the last light of the day. I hung up without a word. That evening, Thomas came by my temporary apartment in Portland. He set a thick black-bound file in front of me, identical to the LLC folder I kept. Except this one contained a formal, legal demand addressed to Linda, Emily, and every party connected to the so-called sale. Cease immediately any transaction, contract, or financial commitment made on the basis of the illegal sale of property owned by Mitchell Property, LLC. Any continued use or consumption of related funds will be deemed a violation of law and subject to prosecution. Thomas slid the file toward me along with a pen. "Sign it. This letter will go out by email, registered mail, and fax to every vendor they have contacted." I sat down at the table, the warm yellow light of the desk lamp falling across the page. The pen moved cleanly, leaving a crisp, decisive signature. When I looked up, I met Thomas's eyes. There were no questions there, only the confirmation that I was ready for this next step. He gathered the file, tapping it lightly. "Tomorrow they'll know there's no way back." After he left, I sat there a while longer, the lamp still on, the keys lying next to the paper with ink that was still damp. Outside, social media was alive with chatter, comments, and accusations. But here, in this small room, the only sound was the faint clink of metal in my hand. A small sound, but to me, it rang like the turning of a lock, and this time I was the one holding the key. News of the so-called bride's family cheating vendors spread like wildfire in dry wind. Less than a week after the florist's post, nearly every vendor on Emily's wedding list had publicly canceled their contracts. It was no longer a matter of rumor within the community. It had become the main topic in local social media groups. I didn't need to ask to know Linda and Emily were spinning like tops. They had grown used to living in a safe circle, a circle I stood outside of, quietly feeding money into. So when that circle shattered, panic was inevitable. From what I heard from a mutual friend, Linda began calling every distant relative, every old acquaintance, asking for loans. But the answers were always the same. Either they couldn't help or they wanted nothing to do with a scandal being talked about everywhere. Emily turned to friends, colleagues, even Alex's parents, and was met with eyes cold as ice. On Tuesday afternoon, I was reviewing steel reinforcement drawings when my phone buzzed. A YouTube notification appeared. "Emily Gill is live." I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. I opened the video. Her face filled the screen, eyes red and wet, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her voice trembled, but was loud enough for viewers to hear clearly. "My father, Ken Mitchell, ruined my wedding. He froze the money, spread lies, made all the vendors cancel. I don't know why he would do this. Maybe he's jealous of my happiness." I leaned back in my chair, unsurprised. But it was what happened in the comments that caught my attention. "You sold your father's house without asking and forged his signature. Who's jealous of who? Happiness built on stolen money will never last. Classic spoiled princess." The negative comments flooded in so fast that Emily began to lose her temper, live on camera. You don't understand anything. This is family business. No one has the right to judge. She shouted before abruptly cutting the stream. I sipped my coffee, hot enough to keep my mind sharp. This storm of public opinion wasn't the destination. It was only the thunder before a much bigger storm. The next day I got a message from Thomas. They are now officially under criminal investigation. I called back immediately. The Pierce County Sheriff's Office has opened a case for forgery and financial fraud. Vendors have filed complaints and the bank has submitted a suspicious activity report. How long until they know? Probably already. Once the police start reaching out for statements, no one can pretend anymore. Sure enough, that evening, Linda called me. I let it ring for a while before picking up. Her voice was unsteady, so different from her usual calm. Ken, the police came to the house. They said, forgery. You have to help me. You're the only one who can now. I cannot help someone who tried to sell my property, I said slowly. You'll deal with your lawyer. Ken, just listen. I didn't know the papers were fake. Emily told me it was all handled. I was quiet for a moment, then replied, now you both know. And I hung up. Less than 5 minutes later, Emily texted, Dad, this is family. How can you let the police investigate us? You're destroying your own reputation. I read it and locked the screen. Reputation. I had spent my entire life building mine with honest work, and they had destroyed it in a single illegal transaction. By Friday, the story was on the local news. Police are investigating alleged fraud in the illegal sale of a Tacoma home. The rightful owner confirmed they did not consent to the sale and suspect their signature was forged. They didn't name me, but anyone following the story online could put the pieces together. That night, alone in my temporary apartment, the warm lamplight fell across the table as I turned the old keys over in my hand. The faint clink of metal was steady. I realized I didn't feel the same anger as before. Instead, it was something else, like the quiet certainty when a steel frame is welded in place, knowing it will stand through any storm. Thomas called again, a faint hint of humor in his voice. Ken, they just hired a new lawyer. I assume they want to negotiate. But that changes nothing. The investigation continues. I didn't ask more. Everything was in the hands of the law now, and this time I wasn't the one who had to rescue anyone. Somewhere out there, Linda and Emily were struggling with the blow I had spent years shielding them from. And I just sat here, the keys secure in my hand, knowing that the doors they once kicked open were now shut, and I was the only one holding the key. That morning, I left the construction site early and drove back to Tacoma. A light rain was falling, the drops clinging to the windshield before sliding down in long streaks, as if erasing part of a memory. In the pocket of my coat, the freshly printed property title from the court still carried the scent of ink. It confirmed what I had known for a long time but was now officially recognized. The two-story house at number 14 Cedar Lane belonged entirely to Mitchell Property LLC, and no one could dispute it. I stopped in front of the familiar driveway. The grass on both sides was still green, though slightly overgrown. The white wooden fence had faded with time and needed a fresh coat of paint. I stepped out of the car and took the old keyring in my hand. The keys were worn, the metal dulled by years, but they still fit perfectly in my palm as they had on the first day. The lock clicked with that familiar sound when I turned the key. The wooden door swung open and the smell of old wood and paint rushed in, carrying with it memories of warm winters and blazing summers I had lived here. Everything was almost exactly the same. The brown sofa set still sat in the corner of the living room. The coffee table I had built myself still bore the small scratch Emily had made as a child. I walked slowly inside, letting my hand brush over the arm of the sofa, the door frame, the kitchen counter. It was still the house I had poured so much effort into restoring, but it felt different now. It was no longer the place I would come home to, but a testament to my work, my patience, and the boundaries I had set. I stood at the living room window, looking out at the lawn where Emily once ran barefoot. Memories drifted past like faded film reels. The sound of her childhood laughter, the hammering of nails as I rebuilt the porch, the smell of pies Linda used to bake during the holidays. But no memory could erase the truth that only a few months ago, the very people tied to this house had tried to sell it behind my back. I sat down in the old armchair and placed the property title on the table. Beside it lay the keyring, catching the afternoon light with a faint glimmer. I knew I had a decision to make. Keeping this house meant keeping both the beautiful memories and the deepest scars. I didn't want to live in a place where every wall whispered the question, how could they do this to me? And I knew that to truly move forward, I needed a new beginning, not just in location, but in my mind. 2 weeks later, the house was listed on the market. Thomas helped me find a reputable realtor who understood this was more than a transaction. It was part of my release. On the day I signed the sales contract, I still used the old keys to unlock the door one last time, guiding the buyer through each room and briefly explaining the structure and renovations I had done. But this time when I left, I didn't look back. The money from the sale went straight into the company account, and I used part of it to buy a small waterfront apartment in Gig Harbor. The balcony faced the water, close enough to hear the waves when the weather was calm, far enough that I couldn't see any street or face tied to the past. The new apartment was just over 70 square meters, but every square meter was mine, untouchable by anyone else. I kept the decor simple. A few seascape paintings, oak bookshelves, a long blue sofa. The old keyring I no longer used still hung on a hook by the door, a reminder of what I had overcome. In the first days in my new place, I spent time walking around the harbor, getting to know a few neighbors. They didn't know who I was, didn't care how many buildings I had built or how much I had lost to family. They just knew me as Ken, the newcomer who liked black coffee and often asked about where to buy fishing gear. I bought a used kayak from a local fisherman. In the early mornings, I pushed the boat into the water and paddled out, letting the sea wind whip through my hair and the salty tang settle on my lips. On some afternoons, I sat for hours at the fishing pier, lowering the line into the deep green water, not expecting to catch much, just to hear the waves and feel the stillness. Occasionally, Thomas called with updates on the case. I listened, but my heart no longer raced. The legal process was still unfolding, but for me, it belonged to another chapter. This new chapter, was about living for myself, no longer seen as someone's walking bank account. I joined a local kayaking club and made friends. They invited me to outdoor barbecues, evenings around a fire sharing stories. No one asked about Linda or Emily. No one mentioned the old house. One evening after a moonlit paddle, I came home to see the warm glow spilling from the living room. The old keyring still hung there, silent as a witness. I touched it, then smiled. It had once been a symbol of what I protected at all costs, and now it was a symbol of what I had learned to let go. I sat down on the sofa and looked out the window. The sea shimmered with the distant lights of fishing boats. I thought about who I had been a year ago, tired, exploited, thinking that silence meant safety. And then I thought about who I was now, still silent, but with the quiet strength of someone who had reclaimed his voice. There was one thing Linda and Emily would never understand. I wasn't happier because I had beaten them. I was happier because I no longer had to live in their world. And sitting there with the sound of the waves and the sea breeze, I knew I hadn't just reclaimed a house, I had reclaimed myself. Late in the afternoon, the sky over Gig Harbor was painted in a pale shade of orange, the last sunlight slanting across the rippling sea. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, holding the old set of keys in my hand. They rested in my palm, cold and familiar, but no longer as heavy as before. For 8 years, I had carried them as a reminder that there are things you must hold on to at all costs. But looking back now, I realized it was never the house itself, but my own self and my boundaries that needed the most protection. I opened the small wooden box on the table outside, the keepsake box I had always used to store objects that marked the closing of a chapter in my life. Inside were a few old photographs, a fountain pen I once used when I first started my career, and now this set of keys. I placed them inside, listening to the faint sound of metal touching wood, then closed the lid. The sound was small but decisive, like the click of a door closing behind you when you know you will never walk into that room again. The sea breeze passed through, carrying the scent of salt and the aroma of timber from the boats moored near the shore. I leaned on the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon. The old house in Tacoma now belonged to someone else, someone who would create new stories within its walls. And I had created my own new story here. I remembered everything. The video call that day, Emily's smug smile, Linda's casual remark about papers being just a small matter, the days gathering evidence with Thomas, the freeze order, the noisy collapse of the wedding, the endless calls and messages. I remembered the very first moment I opened the door to this apartment by the sea and knew that everything had changed forever. I felt no regret, not because they had faced the consequences, but because I had stopped letting myself be an endless wallet for anyone. For a long time, I thought silence, pleasing in others, and sacrificing were ways to hold a family together. But now I understood, if the foundation has rotted, every attempt to rebuild only makes the house collapse faster. I went back inside, poured myself a cup of black coffee, then returned to the balcony and sat down. In my mind echoed the words I wanted to leave behind, not for Linda or Emily, but for anyone who had ever been in my position. You can rebuild a house, but when the foundation of trust has collapsed, it will never stand firm again. Trust is something that, once lost, no material, no effort, no promise can piece back together as it once was. And just like an engineer who sees a structure with severe damage, I knew when it should be repaired and when it had to be abandoned, so a new one could be built somewhere else. I want anyone hearing this story to understand that setting boundaries is not selfish. It is the only way to protect your own value. When you allow others to cross every limit, they will see it as a right, not a kindness. And one day you will realize you have handed them the hammer to break your foundation. I stood stepping to the edge of the balcony, letting the cold wind wrap around me. Below, small waves kept pushing against the shore, retreating and surging forward again. Just like the challenges and losses in life. They never stop, but you can choose where you stand so you are not swept away. I do not know where Linda and Emily are now, or what they are saying about me. Maybe they still think I am cruel, or maybe they are trying to twist the story in a way that benefits them. But that no longer matters. The truth is still here, and I have lived long enough to know that time always stands on its side. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread down to my stomach. In the distance, a few fishing boats switched on their lights, preparing for a long night offshore. Life goes on, needing no apology, needing no forgiveness from those who never valued it. When the sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon, I closed the balcony door, turned off the outside light, leaving behind the sound of the waves and the golden glow of the town reflected on the water. If you are hearing or reading this story, I want you to remember one thing: set boundaries and protect your value. No one else will do it for you, and if you do not, you will soon become an endless resource for people who are ungrateful. And if this story makes you think, if it makes you see even a shadow of yourself in it, keep it as a reminder. Subscribe to this channel to hear more stories like this, not to feed hatred, but to learn how to keep your own foundation steady, even when everything around you is falling apart. Because once you know your worth, you will never let anyone decide for you how you should live.